The elevator doors opened on the 40th floor just as Ethan's phone stopped vibrating. He stepped out with machine oil still faint on his cuffs and cold server room air clinging to his shirt, into a corridor that smelled like lemon polish and expensive wood. A wall of glass threw late afternoon light across the black stone floor, and at the end of it Claire Whitmore stood beside the conference table, one hand on a folder, the city spread behind her like something she believed she owned. "You fixed the cascade failure," she said. "Sit." Ethan didn't correct the phrasing. He hadn't fixed a glitch. He had caught a chain reaction 32 minutes before a client rollout would have broken in 3 states and made the company's top division look careless in public. He had done it without a meeting, without a parade, and without waking half the executive floor. The leather chair creaked under him. The air coming from the ceiling vent was too cold, the kind set for people who never carried equipment, never crawled behind racks, never smelled burned dust before it turned into loss. Claire remained standing. "You did strong work," she said, and for half a second it almost sounded like respect. Then she slid the folder toward him with 2 manicured fingers. "Starting Monday, you'll move upstairs full-time. Special projects. You'll report directly to Logan Whitmore." Ethan looked at the folder but didn't touch it. He could hear the tiny tick of the brushed steel clock on the credenza, and farther out, beyond the sealed glass, the muffled pulse of traffic 40 stories below. "Logan," he repeated. Claire gave a short nod, already moving as if the decision were a kindness that required no discussion. "He needs someone operational. Someone who understands the architecture but knows how to execute without ego. He'll handle strategy. You'll make sure the engine runs." She said it smoothly, almost gently, and that made it land harder. Ethan had built half the engine they were talking about, piece by piece over years no one upstairs had bothered to memorize. He had stayed late when others left, covered for weak forecasts, repaired systems before clients knew there had been danger, and gone home after midnight to a daughter who had learned not to ask why dinner was sometimes reheated twice. Claire opened the folder herself and turned it toward him. A revised title, a narrow salary bump. No authorship, no ownership, no mention of what he had just saved. Only a new chain of command with a family name at the top. "This is a good opportunity," she said. "Loyal people rise in this company." Ethan finally lifted his eyes to hers. "Does Logan know what failed?" Claire's expression did not change. "He knows enough. Does he know why it didn't collapse?" A pause. The vent hummed. Somewhere in the hall, heels clicked once and disappeared. Claire closed the folder. "What matters is alignment, Ethan. Not everyone is meant to be the face of a division. Some people are more valuable behind it." That was the moment the room seemed to lose heat. Not because she had insulted him loudly, because she had priced him quietly. Skill on one side, bloodline on the other. And in her mind, the math had already been done. Ethan stood, slow enough that the chair whispered back across the rug. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend his resume. He only looked at the folder between them as if it were a tool handed to the wrong man. Claire watched him now with the first hint of impatience, as though gratitude was taking too long. Ethan's jaw tightened once, then stilled. The project had been saved, but something else had just been placed on the table, something harder to repair than code, and far more expensive to sell. "Should I tell Logan you accept?" Claire asked, and the silence that followed was no longer about a promotion at all. The conference room next door smelled faintly of burnt coffee and new carpet glue, the kind of polished air that tried too hard to feel expensive. Frosted glass blurred the skyline into pale silver blocks, and the narrow speakerphone in the center of the table gave off a soft electronic hum, waiting like a witness. Ethan stepped in when the assistant held the door, and Claire was already seated at the far end, one hand resting beside a legal pad, the other tapping once against her phone. "Logan's on the line," she said. "This won't take long." A small red light blinked alive on the speaker. Then came the voice, young, smooth, careless in the way only protected people could afford to be. "So this is the guy from Cascade?" Logan asked. "Not who saved it. Not who rebuilt the failed chain before dawn. Just the guy?" Ethan took the empty chair, but didn't lean back. The leather was cold through his shirt. Claire slid a packet across the table, not toward him fully, just far enough to make him reach if he wanted it. On the cover page was a revised org chart. Logan Whitmore at the top of the division. 3 directors below. Ethan's name sat lower than all of them, attached to operational implementation. Logan laughed softly through the speaker. I've looked over the notes. Strong execution. Exactly the kind of support I'll need. The room stayed still for half a breath. Then Claire added, with the calm precision of someone laying silverware before a meal, Logan will be shaping the strategy. You'll help translate that strategy into systems. Ethan's fingers rested on the edge of the packet, but he did not open it. There was a faint scent of Claire's perfume under the air conditioning, something dry and expensive, cedar and citrus with no warmth in it. Cascade had no strategy when I got it, Ethan said. His voice was level, almost quiet enough to disappear into the vent noise. It had broken logic, bad dependencies, and a deadline. Logan answered first. Right, and that's valuable. Very valuable. But there's a difference between building a machine and deciding where the company drives it. Claire nodded toward the speaker as though that settled something. Vision has to sit with leadership. And credit? Ethan asked. The question hung there cleaner than anger would have. Logan gave a little exhale, amused now. Credit sits where accountability sits. Ethan looked down at the page again. Somebody had already drafted language for future internal announcements. Logan would be named as the architect of the division's turnaround. Ethan would oversee execution, stability, and team compliance. There it was, plain as steel under bright light. Not theft in the loud, criminal sense. Something colder. A man being asked to train the hand that would sign over his work. Claire folded her hands. This company rewards loyalty, Ethan. People who understand how to strengthen the structure without needing to stand in front of it tend to go far here. The vent above them clicked, and a ribbon of chilled air moved across the room. Ethan finally opened the packet. Inside were rollout plans built from language he himself had used in late-night emergency notes. Only now the phrasing had been cleaned, polished, and reassigned. Logan kept talking, eager now that silence had not resisted him. I'd like weekly briefings directly from you. Nothing formal at first. Just walk me through the architecture, the decision trees, the team dynamics. Once I've absorbed the framework, I can take it upstairs and keep the board aligned. Ethan lifted one page, then another. Training schedule, transition map, knowledge transfer calendar. It was all there. Not a role, a conversion. If he stayed, he would spend the next few months teaching another man how to wear his fingerprints without ever showing the cuts that made them. Claire watched him over steepled fingers. You're not being sidelined, she said. You're being placed where you're most useful. Useful. The word landed with no more force than dust, and somehow that made it heavier. Ethan set the papers down with care, squaring the stack against the wood grain. Across the glass wall, assistants moved through the corridor in soft shadows, carrying tablets and coffee and deadlines that still believed the building knew what it was doing. Logan, Ethan said, and for the first time the younger man went quiet on the line. If a system fails at the foundation, do you fix the dashboard first? A pause. Depends on optics, Logan said. Claire almost smiled at that, proud of the answer for all the wrong reasons. Ethan's hand withdrew from the packet completely. In that moment, the room gave him something clearer than an offer. It gave him a forecast. Stay, and his work would no longer belong to his hands. Stay, and even the language in his mouth would be borrowed by somebody with the right last name. Claire broke the silence before it could harden into refusal. I need an answer today, she said, the red light of the speaker still burning between them like a tiny commandment. The red speaker light went dark with a soft click, and the room seemed to lose the little warmth it had left. Beyond the glass wall, late afternoon sun slid across steel and stone, clean and cold, while the low hum of the ventilation pressed against the silence like a held breath. Ethan looked at the packet on the table, then at the signature line waiting for him beneath Logan Whitmore's name. Claire did not sit back. She stayed forward, one hand near the folder, the other resting on the polished wood as if the decision already belonged to the building. Well, she said. Her voice was even, but impatience had begun to sharpen its edges. Ethan reached into his wallet, not for a pen, but for his security badge. The plastic was warm from his pocket. The company logo caught the ceiling light for half a second before he set it on top of the packet with a small, flat sound that landed harder than an argument. Claire's eyes dropped to it, then lifted again. Don't be dramatic, she said. This is a career path. Ethan drew a slow breath. The room smelled faintly of toner, coffee gone stale, and the expensive cedar polish they used upstairs to make power feel permanent. A job can be replaced, he said. Money can be earned again. He nudged the badge an inch closer to her. But once a man agrees to stand below a lie, he has to live there. Nothing in his voice rose. That was what chilled the room. Logan's line remained disconnected now, but his shape still lingered in the documents spread across the table, in the revised org chart, in the language Ethan had written with his own hands and found returned to him wearing somebody else's authority. Claire stared at him for a long moment. The kind of stare built from disbelief before anger has chosen its words. "You have a daughter," she said at last, quiet and precise. "You should think carefully before confusing pride with principle." Ethan's jaw tightened once. In another life, maybe he would have defended himself, would have listed rent, groceries, winter shoes, the math every single parent carried like gravel in a coat pocket. Instead, he simply picked up nothing at all. No folder, no severance printout, no offer. "That's exactly why I'm thinking carefully," he said. He stepped back from the table. The leather chair behind him gave a faint squeak against the floor, and somewhere out in the corridor an elevator chimed. Claire rose then, fast enough for the movement to break her calm. "If you walk out over this," she said, "don't expect the door to open again." Ethan turned toward the glass wall, where assistants crossed the corridor in reflections and shadows, carrying tablets, coffee cups, and the illusion that systems ran because titles said they did. He paused with one hand on the handle. The metal felt cool and smooth beneath his palm. "Some things you lose," he said. "Without looking back, you can rebuild." Then he opened the door. "Some things you can't afford to trade." The hallway air felt colder than the conference room, bright with white overhead panels and the distant hiss of printers. Nobody stopped him. A few people looked up, then down again, sensing the shape of a moment without understanding it. At the security turnstile in the lobby, he placed his badge on the stone counter beside the guard station. The guard frowned, half rising from his stool. "You sure about this?" Ethan gave the smallest nod. Through the front glass, downtown traffic moved in bands of gold and brake red, and wind pushed dry leaves along the curb in restless circles. He stepped out into it with empty hands. Behind him, 30 floors above the street, Claire remained in a room that still held his badge, his refusal, and a silence that felt less like departure than subtraction. By the time the elevator doors closed on her reflection, the question had already changed from whether he would stay to how long the machine upstairs could keep pretending it had lost nothing. Fluorescent panels hummed above the 42nd floor, bleaching the glass walls in a cold white sheen, while the city outside blurred in a sheet of late afternoon rain. By Monday morning, Logan Whitmore's name had been slid onto the division dashboard, embossed in navy over a system he had never built, and the change arrived with catered pastries, polished talking points, and a new mandate to modernize velocity. Ethan's empty chair had already been removed from the operations row downstairs, as if absence could be organized into furniture. Logan did not appear in person. His voice came through ceiling speakers and conference mics, bright and restless, cutting across the room with the confidence of someone who had only met risk in presentations. "We're trimming friction. No more engineering bottlenecks. If a process needs 3 approvals, it needs 1. Fingers stayed on keyboards. Coffee cooled untouched. On the shared wall display, approval gates disappeared one by one beneath his revisions, and what had once been a guarded rhythm began to flash faster, cleaner, prettier. Claire stood at the back in a charcoal suit, one hand resting on the spine of a leather chair, watching heads nod around the table. When a senior team lead cleared his throat and pointed out that Cascade's balancing logic had been written to prevent exactly this kind of acceleration, Logan answered with a laugh over the speaker. "Then the logic's old." Nobody mentioned whose logic it was. Nobody said the name missing from the room. By noon, the reports looked excellent. Cycle times were down. Throughput projections climbed. A glossy internal memo called it a breakthrough in execution discipline. But under the cooled air and the faint smell of toner, small things began to slip out of tune. A timing cue hit red for 11 seconds, then corrected. A reconciliation batch rerouted twice before settling. Alert windows opened and vanished before they could become incidents, each one dismissed with a note, a patch, a promise to monitor. In the operations bay, one manager pinched the bridge of his nose and asked for the raw logs instead of the summary deck. Another lowered her voice near the server map and said, "These handoffs aren't lining up." The answer came back just as softly. Don't put that in writing yet. That was the first cost of arrogance. Not disaster. Not yet. But the quiet conversion of honest fear into decorative language. Claire received the afternoon brief in her office with the skyline silver behind her windows and the scent of bergamot from tea gone warm at her elbow. Green bars stretched across the top division's performance board. Logan's revised forecasts glowed on her tablet. The anomalies were tucked on page 6 under temporary variance, framed in consultant language so smooth it almost reflected light. She read the first page twice and the sixth page once. Expected instability during transition, she said, handing the tablet back. Nothing structural. A vice president hesitated, thumb still on the edge of the report. There are dependencies we may not fully, then learn them faster, Claire said, not raising her voice. The room went still in that expensive, carpeted way only executive spaces can manage, where even silence sounds managed. She believed what powerful people often believe when a machine has served them too well for too long, that resilience belongs to the institution, not the hands that taught it how to endure. Downstairs, the dashboards kept shining. Upstairs, the confidence held. And by evening, when a scheduled sync completed on time, but left a faint mismatch buried 3 layers deep in the system's internal accounting, one director closed the error pane, straightened his tie in the dark reflection of the monitor, and sent up another clean report. The division had not failed. That was the danger. It was still standing well enough for Claire to trust it, still smooth enough for Logan to keep pushing, and still frightened enough for everyone beneath them to start hiding the truth in order to survive one more day. By Tuesday night, the air in the lower operations bay had gone dry and overcooled, the kind that made paper edges feel sharper and coffee taste metallic. Monitors threw blue light across tired faces, and somewhere behind the server glass a relay clicked in stubborn little intervals, too steady to sound like panic and too wrong to be ignored. Ethan was not in the building, but the spaces he used to pass through had begun to behave like a body missing a quiet organ. The first person who stopped pretending was not a vice president, not a director, not anyone with carpet under their shoes. It was Marisol Vega, the overnight reconciliation lead, a woman who spent most of her life where the polished reports ended and the actual numbers had to survive the dark. She pulled one batch ledger onto a side screen, then another, then a third. No, she said softly, almost to herself. That money landed. The record just forgot how to admit it. Beside her, a junior analyst shifted in his chair. The dashboard says green. Marisol did not look up. Dashboards don't settle accounts. Her fingers moved again, opening buried timestamp trails. Logan's new efficiency layer had compressed out of view. The room smelled faintly of hot dust and printer toner. A cooling fan whined. What she found was simple enough to explain in one breath and dangerous enough to sink a quarter. Transactions were completing, but the internal audit chain was mislabeling sequence order under heavy load, which meant the division's numbers could look clean on the surface while drifting out of legal alignment underneath. That was no longer transition noise. That was exposure. She printed 6 pages instead of sending an email. Paper still had a way of making cowards feel watched. On the 42nd floor, Claire took the packet standing by the long window of her office while the city flickered below in wet ribbons of white and amber. She read the first page, then the third, then returned to the first with her jaw set tighter than before. Logan's voice came through speakerphone, bright and impatient. If this is about legacy sequencing, we already optimized that. They're seeing old system resistance. Marisol stood across from the desk with both hands clasped behind her back. No, sir, she said. I'm seeing reconciliations detach from trace order after final settlement. If an external review touches this now, we won't be defending process preference. We'll be explaining conflicting records. Claire laid the papers flat on her desk, smoothing them once with the side of her hand, as if pressure alone could calm what was on them. Why was this not elevated earlier? She asked. Marisol answered with a stillness Claire had not heard all week. Because every layer below this one was afraid of bringing you bad news that made Logan look unready. For a second, only the hush of the vent system moved in the room. That sentence did what the data had not quite managed to do. It named the true malfunction. Logan broke in first, sharper now. Then remove the people who hesitated and keep the rollout moving. We do not reward fragility. Claire turned toward the glass. but her reflection gave her back the packet in her hand. The issue was no longer whether the division could survive missing Ethan for another day. The issue was whether her own people had begun choosing self-protection over truth because of the structure she defended. She gave Marisol a direct order, clipped and cold. No wider circulation. Not yet. I want to contain verification by 6 a.m., and I want every variance mapped to a decision point. That will take access Logan restricted, Marisol said. Another silence. Then Claire pressed the speaker button. Restore her permissions. Logan laughed once, dry and disbelieving. You're giving night operations override authority over my architecture? Claire did not raise her voice. I'm giving the company a chance to know whether it is lying to itself. Marisol took the packet copy she had kept for signatures, got the authorization, and left with the fast, controlled steps of someone carrying glass through a crowded room. By 5:12 a.m., under fluorescent light gone pale with fatigue, her team had traced the drift through 4 clients, 11 settlement windows, and 1 set of safeguards Logan had removed because they slowed visible throughput by 1.8%. When the updated variance sheet landed on Claire's desk, it carried a number too large to tuck inside executive language and a note handwritten at the bottom in black ink. This can no longer be described as instability. The sun had barely lifted over the neighboring towers when Claire read the last page, reached for her phone, and realized the next call could not be delegated without costing her the last clean version of her own authority. Cold coffee and overheated circuitry had begun to share the same stale smell by 8:17 a.m., and the main operations wall no longer looked impressive from a distance. Green tiles still glowed across the dashboard, but now narrow bands of amber pulsed underneath them like a fever trying not to show on camera. Claire stood behind the glass of the command floor with the printed variance sheets in one hand and a legal pad in the other, listening to the soft clatter of keyboards below and the thin mechanical whine of the air system fighting the rising heat from too many machines pushed too hard. Hold the noon rollout, she said. Now. Logan was already turning from the table before she finished, jacket open, phone in his hand, impatience moving faster than caution. If you freeze this in front of clients, you create the panic yourself, he said. These are sequencing anomalies, not losses. Claire set the packet down flat. The pages made a dry, final sound on the walnut surface. Not losses yet, she replied. Sit down. He did not. Instead, he tapped his screen and sent something with the brisk confidence of a man who had never had to clean up his own signature. Down on the floor, one cluster of green turned yellow, then red. A second later, 3 client channels dropped in a row. The room changed by inches first. One chair rolled back too fast. One headset came off. One analyst said, no, 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 to nobody in particular. Then the change became public. Alerts broke across the wall in stacked red bars, timestamps misaligned, settlement queues duplicating and then stalling, audit locks refusing to reconcile batches already marked complete. The sound was no longer office sound. It was sharp tones, chair legs scraping, voices losing polish. Marisol did not look up when she spoke. Her fingers were already moving. We've got out-of-order settlement across all 4 exposed clients. Another voice came from the pit, strained and too loud. Westbridge can't certify ledger sequence. A third, Harbor National just suspended acceptance. That was the moment the damage stopped being internal. Claire watched a message appear on the side monitor from Investor Relations, then another from Legal, then one from a client contact marked urgent in red. Logan stepped toward the glass, color draining from his face under the white LEDs. They shouldn't have external visibility this fast. Marisol finally looked up. They do when their money lands in the wrong order, she said. No one answered her. Claire picked up the nearest desk phone instead of her cell, hit the building-wide operations line, and her voice carried through the ceiling speakers with a steadiness that cost something to maintain. Suspend all discretionary automation and cascade. Revert to manual reconciliation priority. No one alters a log. No one deletes a flag. Every client callback routes through my office and general counsel. The floor moved at once. Not smoothly, not heroically, but with the blunt obedience people reserve for fire alarms and landing gear. Logan tried once more, lower now. If we announce manual fallback, the board will read that as failure. Claire turned to him at last. Morning light had reached the edge of the glass behind her, turning the room pale, and unforgiving. "The board can read," she said. "What I need to know is whether you can." She took the tablet from his hand before he could pull it back and scan the outgoing authorization he had just approved. Keep rollout moving. Suppress non-client-facing alert escalation. Maintain appearance of stability pending executive review. For a beat, only the hum of the vents and the distant alert tones filled the space between them. Then she placed the tablet on the table as carefully as if it might crack. The cost had changed shape. This was no longer drift, no longer fear in reporting, no longer one overnight team carrying truth up the stairs. A client had halted settlement. Legal exposure was active, and Logan had tried to preserve image after the breach had crossed into the open. Claire drew one slow breath, pressed her thumb against the bridge of her nose, and made the decision that could not be softened by staff, counsel, or blood. "Conference room. 10 minutes, she said. "You, me, legal, HR." Logan opened his mouth, but she had already reached for her coat and the private number she had refused to use before. The line rang once in her ear while red notifications continued to bloom across the wall, and when the second ring began, the question was no longer whether the division was falling. It was whether the only man who had walked away with his dignity intact would even take her call. The private line clicked, then filled with the soft hiss of evening traffic and a child laughing somewhere close to the phone. "Dad, your noodles are boiling," a young girl called in the background. And for one brief second, the fluorescent buzz of the crisis floor seemed very far away from the warm domestic noise on the other end. Claire stood just outside the glass conference room, coat still on, red alerts pulsing against the walls behind her like reflected brake lights. When Ethan answered, his voice was even, low, almost careful. "This is Ethan." She did not waste a word. "I need 10 minutes. A pause. The clatter of a spoon against a pot. "About the system?" he asked. "About what was done," she said. Through the glass, Logan was inside already, jacket off, jaw tight, speaking too fast to legal while HR kept a yellow folder closed on the table. Claire turned away from the room and looked down at the city lights smeared across the wet windows. Not tomorrow. Now. The line stayed quiet long enough for the hum of the HVAC to become its own kind of pressure. Then Ethan said, "I'm not coming back to rescue your nephew from a title he didn't earn." The words landed without heat. That made them heavier. Claire closed her eyes for half a beat and let the truth stand where it was. "I'm not asking for that." In his apartment, she could hear a burner click lower, then the muffled scrape of a chair. He was listening now, not yielding, simply listening. "Cascade is exposed across multiple clients," she said. Logan removed safeguards, then authorized a message to preserve stability after exposure was already public. "Legal is in the room. HR is in the room. I'm about to decide whether he remains in this company by morning, and I will not make that decision while pretending I still understand the full shape of what you built." Behind her, the conference room door opened. Logan stepped out before anyone invited him, cologne sharp in the cold air, phone still in his hand. "You do not need him for this," he said. "This is exactly how old staff keep leverage." Claire lifted one finger without looking at him, and the gesture stopped him more effectively than anger would have. On the line, Ethan did not speak. She heard instead the small sounds of a life he had protected when he walked out. Cabinet wood, steam, a child asking if she should set out 2 bowls. Claire swallowed once. The taste of stale coffee and metal sat at the back of her throat. "You were right to leave," she said, each word plain enough to bruise. Logan let out a disbelieving breath. Legal looked up through the glass. HR straightened in her chair. Claire kept her eyes on the rain-ribbed window and went on. "I asked you to stand beneath someone who had not earned the ground under his own shoes. I called that structure. It was favoritism. I called it loyalty. It was fear of crossing blood. I am correcting that now." The hallway fell so still that even the printers down the corridor could be heard feeding paper, one sheet at a time. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Correcting how?" he asked. There it was, the new weight, no longer whether she could reach him, but what she would put at risk once she had. Claire turned at last. Logan's face had gone pale under the recessed lights, but he still held himself with that brittle executive stiffness, as if confidence might survive exposure if he wore it hard enough. She opened the conference room door and spoke so both the room and the phone could hear. "Logan Whitmore, effective immediately. You are removed from operational authority pending formal board review. Surrender system access, your company phone, and your badge to HR. Logan stared at her, then gave one short laugh that cracked at the edges. You're doing this because he made you feel guilty? No, Claire said. I'm doing it because facts arrived before humility, and now both are here. HR stood. Legal rose beside her. Logan looked toward the elevator bank as if the building itself might object on his behalf, then back to his aunt, and found no shelter there. On the phone, Ethan said nothing at all. He did not rush in to fill the silence. He let her stand inside it. Claire tightened her grip on the phone and lowered her voice. 10 minutes, she said again. Not to bring you under anyone. To hear what it will take for you to speak, and what I will have to say in front of my board if I want any right to ask it. The burner hissed faintly through the line. Somewhere near Ethan, a bowl touched a placemat. When he answered, his tone had not softened, but it had changed. I'll give you 10, he said, but not in your tower. Rain had left a silver skin across the diner windows, and the neon vacancy sign buzzed with a tired blue hum that made the chrome sugar pourers glow like small lanterns. Coffee and fryer oil hung in the warm air while, outside, tires whispered over wet asphalt. Claire arrived first, not with an escort and not through a private entrance, but through the front door like everyone else, carrying the cold of the night in the shoulders of her coat. She chose the back booth Ethan had named, the one beneath a flickering beer sign and beside a window fogged at the corners, then slid a legal pad across the table and set her phone face down as if disarming something. When Ethan came in 3 minutes later, he had his daughter's pink hair tie looped around 2 fingers and the faint scent of dish soap still clinging to his hands. He did not sit until he looked once at the room, once at Claire, and once at the exit. You said 10, he told her. So use them well. The waitress set down 2 waters without asking. Ice clicked softly against glass. Claire did not reach for hers. I'm not here to hire you back into the same lie, she said. I'm here because I put loyalty above competence, family above fact, and your name underneath work you were already carrying. Ethan remained standing a beat longer, then sat, but only halfway into the booth, his coat still on. That's true, he said. It's also late. The admission cost her more than apology had on the call. It was no longer about being wrong in private. It was about setting fire to her own cover in front of the one person who would recognize whether the flame was real. She opened the pad and turned it toward him. Across the top she had written, in thick black ink, Logan removed from operations. Beneath that, for lines, temporary board notice by midnight. Client disclosure under general counsel review. Access rollback in progress. Emergency authority transferred to CEO only. Ethan's eyes moved down the page and stopped there. The diner's overhead vent rattled once, then settled. That's movement, he said. Not a decision. Claire took the words without flinching. Then hear the rest. From her coat pocket, she drew Logan's badge in a clear evidence sleeve and laid it on the table beside the napkin dispenser. The plastic caught the blue neon and looked almost ceremonial in its defeat. He's out of the division. Out of the floor. Out of system authority. By morning, the board gets my memo stating I overrode merit to protect blood. They can do what they want with that after. A fork fell somewhere near the counter. Someone laughed too loudly, then stopped. Ethan finally touched his water, not to drink, just to turn the glass a quarter inch on the paper placemat. If you say that to the board, he said, you don't get to walk it back next quarter. I know. If you restore the safeguards the way legal wants, you'll preserve evidence, but slow every promise Logan made. I know. If you ask me to tell you how to stop the bleeding, you'll also be admitting the strongest division in your company was being held together by someone you treated like a subordinate to your nephew. Claire looked straight at him then, with no executive polish left between them, only fatigue around the eyes and rain still darkening the hem of her coat. I know that too. He leaned back at last, and the vinyl gave a small sigh under his weight. In the kitchen, a ticket printer began its dry insect chatter. This was no longer the company trying to lure back a useful man with a sweeter title. This was a chief executive choosing which part of her empire she would let burn, her family protection, her board standing, or the fiction that authority and worth were the same thing. Ethan reached into his jacket, took out a folded receipt, and wrote on the back with the waitress's pen. For conditions, neat and spare. No title tonight. No office. No report through intermediaries. and one more line that made Claire's fingers still before she picked it up. If I speak in front of your board tomorrow, not behind your nephew's wreckage. You don't come back under me, Claire said quietly, reading. You come in above the lie. No, Ethan said, and his voice stayed level enough to make the word heavier. I come in outside it. For 10 minutes of truth, and nothing else unless the truth survives daylight. Her jaw tightened once, then eased. She signed the back of the receipt with the same pen, pressing hard enough to emboss the paper against the tabletop. It was not a contract any court would admire, but it was a bridge she could not cross and then pretend not to have crossed. Ethan stood. The booth springs rose softly as his weight left them. Tomorrow, he said, 9 a.m. Your board hears what was removed, who removed it, and what it will take to keep Cascade legal by market open. If anyone tries to turn that into a loyalty test, I walk. Claire nodded once. No bargaining. No softening. Outside, a bus died at the curb and sent a sheet of rainwater whispering along the gutter. Ethan took 2 bills from his wallet and left them under the untouched water glass. One for the waitress and one for the table he had used to draw a line no one in her tower had managed to draw. Then he left her there with Logan's dead badge, her signature on the receipt, and a morning that would either save the division or expose, in full light, how far it had already fallen. Fluorescent light flattened every face around the long walnut table, and the air carried that dry mix of printer heat, coffee gone bitter, and carpet cleaner that lives in rooms where people prepare to protect themselves. At 9 sharp, the board packets waited in neat stacks, each one heavier than paper had any right to be. Claire entered first with general counsel at her shoulder, set the signed diner receipt beside her folder, and did not take the chair at the head until Ethan walked in a few seconds later wearing the same plain jacket he had worn out of her building. No escort, no badge, no borrowed authority, just a man who had come to speak in daylight because darkness had already cost enough. One director cleared his throat. Another tapped a pen. Claire lifted a hand before anyone else could begin. Before Mr. Cole says a word, she said, voice steady but stripped of polish. The record will reflect that I placed family loyalty above operational competence. Logan Whitmore has been removed from operational authority. His access has been terminated, and this board will receive a full written disclosure today. The room shifted at that, leather creaking, papers moving, old instincts rearranging themselves. She did not look at Ethan for rescue. She looked at the board she had delayed telling. This failure sits with me first. That was the first silence. Ethan stayed standing until Claire nodded once toward the empty chair beside the end of the table, not at the center, not beneath anyone. He sat, laid both hands on the wood, and turned one page in the packet. Tab 3, he said. No flourish, no revenge. The division did not fail because the system was old. It failed because control points were removed by someone who mistook friction for waste. He spoke in clean, measured lines, each sentence landing like a bolt set into steel. He showed the transaction drift. He showed the audit order break. He showed where the safeguards had once stopped small errors from becoming public exposure. Then he stopped speaking and let the highlighted timestamps do what pride had tried not to let truth do. A director with silver glasses leaned forward. Can this be stabilized before market open tomorrow? Ethan looked at him, then at Claire, because this answer now belonged to both competence and consequence. Yes, he said, but not by pretending the same structure can carry a different name and become honest. The legal counsel slid a yellow pad closer. Pens clicked. Somebody near the far window whispered, Jesus, so softly it almost disappeared into the hum of the vents. Ethan went on. Manual reconciliation through a protected chain. Restoration of every removed safeguard. Independent sign-off from reconciliation before rollout authority. No family reporting lines inside the division. Board-level oversight for 90 days. He did not ask for his old seat back. He did not ask for Logan's office. He asked for architecture that could not be bent around somebody's last name. Claire listened without interrupting, shoulders still, one thumb pressed once against the edge of the diner receipt, as if it were a sharp thing reminding her to stay honest. Then the oldest board member, a woman with a navy silk scarf and a voice worn smooth by decades of hard rooms, turned to Claire. If we adopt this, who runs it? Claire's answer came before the question had fully settled. Ethan does, she said. Not under interim family supervision. Not under me in shadow. He will have direct authority over the division rebuild, direct reporting access to the board committee for the term of remediation, and the right to refuse any instruction that compromises legal controls. There it was at last, the distance between being told to work under somebody's nephew and being handed the authority that should have followed the work from the beginning. But Ethan did not move right away. The heater clicked in the wall. Somewhere down the hall a cart rattled over tile. He reached into his folder, took out a single page, and slid it toward Claire. It was his acceptance, already signed, but the title at the top was not employee reassignment. It was Division Head, Operational Integrity. Claire read it, picked up her pen, and signed beneath his name while the board watched. No one argued. No one defended Logan. No one tried to rewrap humiliation as hierarchy. The vote to adopt the remediation terms carried unanimously, hands lifting one by one in a room that had finally run out of places to hide. When it was over, Claire stood and offered her hand across the polished table. Ethan looked at it for a brief second, then took it. Her grip was firm, but the power in the room no longer came from title alone. "You were right to walk," she said quietly. "And you were right to make us say it out loud." Ethan released her hand, gathered his folder, and glanced at the phone on the table where a text from his daughter still sat unread at the top of his lock screen. Noodles? He allowed himself the smallest breath, something close to warmth returning after a long cold corridor. "I'll be home by dinner," he said, and in that bright, expensive room where pride had nearly buried truth, the division did not rise because a CEO gave a favor. It rose because a single father walked away before they could teach his daughter that dignity was negotiable.